podcast. I am your host, John Keene. As always, I would like to thank you guys for joining me. Ask that you please add, follow, and check us out. Instagram, Facebook, Best Damn Podcast, Twitter, or X, The Real Best Damn. And wherever you watch this from, whether you check it out on YouTube, Facebook, Rumble, BitChute, please make sure to hit the thumbs up and give us a like. Make sure to follow or subscribe. Click for the notifications. Click all on the notifications bell. And, leave a comment. Let me know what you think. And remember, the very best way to support is by sharing the links. So, share it. Help me to get it out there. That way new people can find me. And if you would like to donate and support to the channel, we are completely viewer powered. So you can do that by going to PayPal, Cash App, Patreon, or Facebook Messenger Pay. All the links are in the description. I think they're in the chat as well. And I will pin them at the top of the comment section. So I was going to do this one last night, but I actually fell asleep before the live got started. So hopefully we get some people filing in here in just a moment. I don't know if the notifications have even went out. You know how YouTube is and how they are with the notifications, but this is climbing out of the bottomless pit. I think a lot of the stuff that I've seen lately, I don't know why I get this weird glare over here for some reason. I think a lot of the stuff that I've seen lately, society in itself, our world in itself, we're in a dark place. And this isn't like doom and gloom or fear porn or anything like that. It's just it's a statement of the truth. Sorry about that. Let my phone fall asleep. It's a statement of the truth. It's a fact. It's a fact. Just for kind of like an example, look around you today. And kind of look at our society as a whole and what we find to be acceptable. We just had a recent school bang, right? Where a transgender man, woman, whatever, shoots up a Catholic school, And what's crazy about this, and I've seen many different pundits and stuff, drop their little, hot takes on this, and everybody's always got a fucking opinion in today's world, but quite obviously, in my opinion, every time we see these types of events, every time we see these particular things take place, there appears to be fuckery, going on along with it. I believe I was watching Nick Fuentes live stream last night, and he's basically saying, like, the people who say that it's the CIA and all of this that are connected to these things are stupid. And it's like, no, man, I'm sorry, I disagree with you. I think in 9 times out of 10, whenever we see these types of events, these types of situations, not this one in particular, they're, being crisis acting or anything like that, because it doesn't have room for that per se, the whole crisis acting deal. But it does have, MK Ultra, shit like that written all over it, man. Whenever you got somebody, especially someone who's got such a deranged ideology like that, these are people that are completely mentally ill and sick, and we do know that, and I know this firsthand, and I'm sure a lot of you guys could probably, verify this as well. A lot of people, that are looking into things that can label them dissidents or that are on the fringe of society, in these chat rooms, in these groups, whether it be on Telegram or Discord or anything like that, they are infiltrated by intelligence, and those intelligence agents pick people out, they target them. And once they begin to target them, they implement certain methods of mind control through psychological and electronic torture, and it's like you got somebody that doesn't even know what fucking gender they are, and they got this dysphoria with that, and then they're having target practice at pictures of Jesus, and it just so happens, it conveniently had these letters that were written in Russian and, all of this, and it's like, it just kind of goes to show, when we see a lot of events in society, whenever they happen, they're immediately fucking scrubbed, right? The people's let's take for instance that Black Hawk helicopter that recently crashed into the passenger plane in DC, right? All the people that were involved in that on social media and many other events, as soon as it goes public, as soon as it happens, these people's entire social media is scrubbed. Everybody's removed. You can't find anything on their history, their political views, none of that shit, right? It's gone. But whenever they want to push a narrative, whenever they want to propagate something, then all of a sudden it's all available, right? Like in this case, And that's one thing, right? This is like a telltale sign of what the newer, and I hate to say it, the alpha generation, right? It's a bunch of people I feel like that are really like that. They've been bombarded with nonsense, psychological warfare, just like we all have. But I feel like it's been ratcheted up and perversed, and everything is inverted so much. That it's taken on a whole new level, right? And it evolves as the generations go on, right? Then you look at like all of the Epstein shit, right? Take a look at all the Epstein stuff. We've seen that our government doesn't give a shit about, our children, right? Not only do they not care, they're involved, they're involved. Intelligence is involved in these crimes against, the portion of society that and I'm trying to choose my words carefully. They're involved in these crimes against the portion of society that we should be protecting the most, right? This should be the protected part of our society. And in all past generations, right, that's what we've done. We've made sure that our kids are always okay. This is And trust me, I've been to prison. I've been to the penitentiary, and in the particular prison I was at, those type of offenders were housed there, and they are protected in a lot of those places. And the reason them being protected is because they have to be, because if they're not, there's a type of justice that is dealt out amongst the people, right? Amongst the people, because that is the part of the population, that we all kind of come together, and come together and look out after. But I think when you look at who our leaders are, how they got into these positions of leadership, right? And the fact that they belong to all of these, secret societies, mystery schools, they practice these different forms of occultism, and within this Satanism and occultism and these secret societies, that is prominent, it's extremely prominent. Sex magic, being one of those areas that's extremely prominent. And then the sacrificing of innocents, or SRA, ritualistic abuse. That's why we see it being used on so many people, and it's not, I don't think that we're always experiencing, mass psychosis like a lot of people think. I think it's just, it's mass psychological warfare, that's created this psychosis. We see a society that is fragmented because, see, in humans, and this is how I kind of see things. I see all of us as kind of like a hive organism, and you can kind of see this play out too, where, the Bible says that there's nothing new under the sun, right? And you see the same collective story cycle over and over and over throughout time, right? And then you think about a reincarnation cycle, right? So on the micro to the macro, right? It's like us as an individual entity, an individual spark, an individual spirit, we probably enter into the life cycle over and over and over and over again, right? It's a multitude of times. You probably lived, a billion different lifetimes, and they're all these short lifetimes. You live, you learn, you die, you live, you learn, you die, right? Over and over and over. Well, look at it as a collective too. If we are all, part of this larger organism, which is humanity, the collective soul, right? The collective soul. Well, it does the same thing. It's like the reincarnation of the entirety, within these cycles that we experience, whether they're 100-year cycles, 7,000-year cycles, 12,000-year cycles, just as we have larger and smaller cycles within our lifetime, as we go from adolescence through puberty into adulthood, and then we go into, older age and all of these things, right? So we have cycles within our lifetime as well, shorter, longer, right? As a collective, we experience the same thing, and we appear to be at a place in the overall collective spiritual growth where darkness is no longer acceptable. Lies are no longer acceptable. What once used to be, and it used to be extremely taboo, I think we were at a place for a long time. I can remember when I started creating content and when I really started to learn about a lot of these things, and I really got into the content around 2015, 2016. It was very sex magic, SRA, those type of things were extremely taboo. And matter of fact, if you talk to a lot of people, they didn't even believe that this shit was possible. They had this understanding, and I believe there's still people that have this cognitive dissonance where they believe that, just because you wouldn't do it, or just because you're not like that, that means they aren't like that. And I mean they as in the powers that be, right? Just because you wouldn't sacrifice a person, or just because you wouldn't, control a population and, create or depopulate or have these genocides and all these things that they do, they feel like it's impossible for the people that are in charge to do these things as well, But the difference is, and I've said this before, like if you understand where these people actually descend from, right? Their lineage goes back all the way to the fallen, it goes back all the way to the fallen. These people believe that they descend from Satan and the fallen angels himself, so they have an entirely different viewpoint, an entirely different scope on life, an entirely different way of looking at things. They believe in wholeheartedly. Imagine a person that's, raised up in North Korea or, one of these third world countries, right? Where they're not fed by, the internet, in the world at large, and they don't have this long, this wider scope or viewpoint of things. They believe they see things in a very limited view, a limited perspective. I was actually watching something on somebody that defected from North Korea, right? And he was talking about how, the propaganda that they experience, they're told, that North Korea is the greatest army in the world. They're told all these things about their country that just absolutely are not true. And because they have such a limited perspective, that's what they believe, right? That's what they believe. Well, I feel like for us, it's kind of the same. A lot of us, we grow up and we're not exposed, we're not cultured, into a lot of this, as somebody like, who comes up in the Rothschilds, for instance, right? They're international from the time they can walk, right? They have just an entirely different experience, an entirely different culture. I've heard, members of the Rothschild family talk about how, they don't talk about nothing that goes on in their family, right? So you wonder, like, how people can be groomed from children to be into these things. And it's like, well, when you come up in a family and in a culture and in a system and in a society like that, it's just considered normal. Right? It's just considered normal. Monarchs, of old, kings and queens of old. That's why they would marry brothers and sisters. It was something that, they did. Commoners don't do that. We see that as, pretty weird, pretty gross, But according to them, they're taught to keep their bloodlines pure. It's just very different. And when you believe that you're fighting on behalf, and think about you, if you feel like you have a calling, right, from God, and you feel like you're literally fighting on behalf of God, a lot of people do, and this is why people become so judgmental and hypocritical and all of these things, because they feel like they have to defend God, whether it's on the comment section of a video or groups online or, all of this. They feel like, well, I got to stand up for God. I got to stand up for Christianity. I got to stand up for this or stand up for that, right? So they feel it's a personal thing to them. And the reason being because our religions and our political views and beliefs are such a big part of our identity, we personalize it and we take it personal when our ideologies are attacked, Now imagine if you're bred to think that you literally descend from Satan himself, that your lineage is literally, one of the fallen, that you're literally part deity, part God, that you have the blood of these angelic, beings that are running through your veins, and that you're participating in a war older than time itself, right? And that your side, and think about it, how we see it as, we're trying to, and I feel like a lot of people in the truth community, spiritual community could really agree, it's like we see things as we are at a war, a spiritual war, because we are, where it's like shedding light on things, exposing the truth on things, and we feel a calling to do that. We feel purpose within ourselves to do that. Some people feel a purpose within themselves to bring others to God or teach them about Jesus or whatever, right? Like everybody has their own calling, their own purpose. And some people, don't. Maybe they feel a calling and purpose in another area of their life, but these people, they feel like they're at enmity with God and they see God as the oppressor, They see God as the one that's enslaved us, that, keeps us from doing what we want to do. Think about Old Testament God. And I talked about this in the last video. And it's like, and this is how a lot of people, this is how I feel like I've been deceived. And, maybe you guys can agree or relate or whatever, but I feel like I've been deceived by, they use these key points, these talking points, when people are trying to bring you into the occult, or people are trying to bring you into a different point of view or a different way of looking at things, right? They'll use like, why would God, allow people to be murdered? Why would God allow people to be killed? Why would God allow innocent children to be hurt? Why would God do these kind of things? And this kind of like gets a person thinking. And I know people that have capitalized extremely big off of this, right? By convincing the masses and convincing the people that follow them that God is an evil piece of shit, and that who we believe God to be, and I think this says a lot more about the person really than God, but who we believe God to be, is not who God actually is. It's like, looking at God in the tale of the garden, right? The Garden of Eden. It's like, well, why would he allow, the serpent in the garden to begin with, right? Why wouldn't he protect us? Why would he even put the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and say, you can't eat from this one tree, right? Knowing if he told us not to, that we would, right? And I think, the reason being, and I've said this before, is because the only way you can truly have love, or freedom, or any of these things is by allowing someone to make the choice on their own. It's like he allowed the serpent to be in the garden because He allows free will for everything. So if the serpent wanted to go into the garden, the serpent could be in the garden, right? He's not going to stop. He's not going to restrict the serpent either. He's giving free will to all of his creation, not just us. Not just us. That's one thing. And if we don't have the freedom to choose him, then how can we truly choose him? We are just slaves that way. We are automatons that way. There's no way he could actually ever know it, that we genuinely love him, right? The way that he loves us. So, there almost has to be an adversary. There almost has to be an opposite. There almost has to be, because in order to have choice, you have to have, you have to have something that's different. You have to have something different to choose from, So it's like, why would he allow Satan to exist? Well, why? Because he's got to offer you both sides of the coin. He's giving you the freedom to choose the lifestyle you want to choose. And when you think of God too, a lot of people, I think, really misunderstand it. But it's like, when it says we're made in his image, a lot of people see free will and freedom as the right to do whatever you want to do, right? Like, that's what freedom is. And honestly, I think, myself, I used to believe that. I used to think that freedom and free will meant, being able to do whatever you wanted to do. But I think freedom also, and free will also is like the ability, it's like being able to control yourself, to keep yourself from doing things as well too, when you think about God is the omnipresent, omnipotent creator over all things, right? This is an entity or a being that has the ability to do whatever it wants, whenever it wants, at any time. But what does it choose to do, right? Because this free will choice, it chooses to serve, it chooses to serve everything in existence. It's in servitude, in service of everything, right? It literally has no need for nothing that it's created, but it's made itself vulnerable. It's made itself vulnerable. And that shows you that love is just truly being, in order to have love, we have to be vulnerable, And I think that's a hard thing for a lot of people, and society creates more and more of that within us, because we're always taught to be guarded. We learn to be guarded through learned experience, right? But God being omnipotent, omnipresent, having the ability to do anything that it chooses to do, with that choice, it chooses to serve. It chooses to be in servitude to all of its creation. It's literally at our beck and call, God doesn't pray to us and ask us for shit. It's us asking God for stuff all the time. It's God constantly working on behalf of all that it's created. And when we look at like the different concepts, of thy will be done or do what thou wilt, it kind of really puts that in perspective. It's like, that's why Paul, the Apostle Paul talks about being a slave in Christ, right? Being a prisoner in Christ. That's freedom right there. That's free will right there. It's having the ability to choose to do that. That's true love. It's like, I could reject you. I could do the opposite. I could, war against you. I could do anything I want to, but I'm going to choose to follow your rules. That means I truly value you. I truly respect you. And I think because we learn too, and like, at least I learned, through my father as a kid, Fear is a motivator for a lot of people, and there's supposed to be a healthy fear and respect for God, but ultimately, fear doesn't create reverence the same way that love does, right? Or respect does. When we see how just, and that's another thing too. It's like, I think, at the end of the day, it's like, are we trusting? Are we trusting that, God's judgment is just? Are we trusting that God's judgment is just, and that, because, we have to leave vengeance, to God. It's like, it's hard sometimes to watch the world, like I said, look at like all the Epstein shit, look at what the governments are doing through, the different technocracies and, vaccinations and just all of this. It's hard not to want to get back at that. At least for me. I have like a fighting spirit, It's like I'm an eye for an eye type of person. I just am. I always have been. So it's hard for me not to go back into that, The world kind of trains us to be that way. If somebody, I was taught as a kid, I'm sure some of you guys were too. If somebody punches you, you punch them back, And then Jesus comes along and says, turn the other cheek. Now, that's extremely hard to do, right? Extremely hard to do. And I believe it was Jordan Peterson, he was saying that basically, there's, and a lot of people that do turn the other cheek, and this is true, I've learned this in life too. A lot of people that do turn the other cheek, they turn the other cheek mainly because they have to, Like if you're just a weak person, and a lot of men do this, predatory men especially, they will use their weakness, and this is a big part of society today, which sucks, but a big part of society today is to virtue signal our weakness, right? And try to use our weakness as some type of virtue, right? Like, oh, look at me. I respect women, and, I don't hit people back, and, I do this and I do that. And the people that are usually using that as a virtue or claiming that to be a virtue are the people that can't do that, right? They don't prey on, or womanize women or whatever because they can't get women. They don't, return fire on people because they can't, right? They don't punch back because they're too weak to punch back. They're afraid, and they try to use that as their virtue, And, Peterson basically says it's like, it's the person that has the ability. That's where true virtue comes from. It's like when we have the ability to be evil, when we have the ability to be violent, when we have the ability to be deceptive and to be pieces of shit, right? And we choose not to. There's virtue in that, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. It's like when you truly have the ability to be dangerous, and you're choosing not to be, you're choosing not to be. You're choosing restraint, not out of fear, not out of weakness, not out of lack, not because you can't, but because you're making that choice. Then that's a moral virtue, Now when you're lacking, you have this deficit, and you're just weak and you can't do it. There's nothing virtuous in that, nothing at all. But for whatever reason, society has become this, this place where people do use that to virtue signal, big time. This is where we get like the modern day cucks and beta males and all of that, which I feel like it's dying out. How many of you guys actually see, there is a trend, and which is crazy because it's like it just shows you how neither side of the political aisle is worth a shit, right? Because you can watch the population dance from one side to the other, one side to the other, right? Everybody was kind of like, it was a very liberal-minded stuff for a very long time. Things were progressive, especially during the Obama years, right? People were voting more liberal. We had gay marriage come in and, all of these things, right? We were pushing more towards socialist society with Obamacare and government phones and all of this, right? And then now you see kind of like, with the Trump regime, you've seen society push more towards a conservative side of the aisle. And how many people got a fucking rude awakening, right? How many people have gotten a rude awakening about the political system? If you didn't get it in round one with Donald Trump, then I hope you've gotten it in round two. I hope you have truly learned the meaning and definition of controlled opposition. I can't tell you how many people I would see comment and like they it's because they don't know me, but they would say just a liberal and da 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 if I would say something about Trump, right? That would be the first thing out of their mouth. It's those liberals doing this, da da da. It's like they don't see how programmed they are. They don't see how brainwashed they are, truly. And I mean, you really, truly are. I'm not saying that the liberal side is good or, virtuous or something awesome, But I'm saying when we've relegated ourselves to the point to where we stop critically thinking and we just point our finger, and everything becomes anti and pro, right? We got to start asking some real fucking questions. Like, how do we get to this place, right? How do we get to everything has to be relegated to anti and pro, Like, where is the happy medium, Where is the middle ground? And I feel like that's where we're shifting more at a society. And I would love to see, more mass awakening and mass awakening that's not attached to political at all. I feel like Trump and the right really capitalized on, Great Awakening and all of that shit, But lucky for us, a lot of those Q-tards look completely stupid now, I guess they didn't see that, QAnon was a knockoff from Operation Nasara, right, back in the Bush days. I mean, how many people even know about that? I'm sure a lot of the people that watch my channel know about that. But you guys remember Operation Nasara, right? Operation Nasara back in the days of George Bush. And seeing this is when modern day intelligence and shit, like it reminds me of basically the 1960s. The underground intelligence of the 1960s now made mainstream. Right? The shit they were doing in the 60s was wild, dude. They were killing presidents. They were tapping phones of presidents. They were doing MK Ultra, putting LSD in people's drinks. They were doing wild shit in the 60s, intelligence was, right? Well, after 2001, 9/11, now they just do it. It ain't a secret no more, right? It's like, yeah, we're going to make laws to where we can just tap your phone. We can watch you. We can surveil you. We can do anything we want because of this terror attack. Operation Nasara was literally just like QAnon, this online PSYOP, psychological warfare operation, where basically they said that George Bush, there's something about aliens coming here to help us and, shit like that, which kind of like anybody who which I hope, man, people aren't still falling for it. I see less people falling for it, at least. All the channel messages and shit like that. Like, you know, to me, it's very obvious and it's very, very clear that if there are extraterrestrials here, that they're not here to help. They're not here to help. So all the people channeling from the Pleiades, I think, for one, I think most of them are full of shit, and they're just making it up. Lots of them actually are. And you can tell because anything that's true has resistance. It has censorship. It's attacked, right? It's like, it's not allowed to flourish, it's damn sure not promoted, and you see stuff like that being extremely promoted, like on Gaia and shit like that lets right there that it's bullshit. If they're putting it on Gaia TV, I'm telling you, it's nonsense right there. It's nonsense, Gaia is like the watered down mainstream version of, of the consciousness movement, right? Like, here we're gonna give you the knockoff, and all the shit that these people are claiming to channel. It's like, it's nothing profound at all, really. You ever heard Bashar talk? Like, it's just the dude shutting his fucking eyes, telling you what he thinks. I could do it just as easy, and I would love to know, just me personally, I would love to know how many people out there have had experiences with extraterrestrials. I do believe there are extraterrestrials. I believe a lot of what we see in our skies, especially, are what you call ARVs, right? Those alien replica vehicles. And I believe 99.9999% of what, these people that are coming out from the Navy and, intelligence and whistleblowers, but these people are coming out, and what they're actually doing is pushing out disinformation into the masses, and this is how you can tell that somebody is an op and that they're still being utilized by intelligence. Like, see, whenever they ask them, a true whistleblower would have no restriction on what they're saying, right? If you're truly breaking ranks, right? Like, when you come out, if they ask me, right? Say I'm in the FBI, right? I'm breaking rank and file. I'm coming out to expose something, and I have to expose it to save my life, right? Because they're gonna fucking kill me, if I tell you these things, type shit, right? Well, I'm going to dump it all out. I'm going to dump every bit of information that I have. And so would those people, because that's the only way it keeps them alive, right? It's to get it all out there, because if you still have secrets, they'll make sure you take them to the grave, right? There ain't no holding back a little bit, because it's not a good insurance policy if it's not out, The only way you're going to get protection is the masses know that your life's in jeopardy, and that if something happens to you, that you were killed, right? That's about all you can do when it comes to that kind of stuff. But when these people come out, these whistleblowers come out and they start talking about these things, I think it's hilarious. They'll be asked a question and they'll say, I can't discuss that. Really? You can't discuss, you're a whistleblower that's going against the government, but you can't talk about that particular point. That's because you're using talking points, right? That lets you know that they're coming from off script, right? They're using a script, and they have talking points. They've been given talking points to discuss, on these podcasts and stuff like that, which is crazy, because when we see these podcasts, and I don't know how many people are catching on, but the podcast now, it's become mainstream media. It's like, we can't have nothing good. We really can't. We can't have no movement or nothing good. Nothing ever stays grassroots in this world. It always is corrupted, which is sad. we watched the fall of the mainstream media, and then what happened, the rise of podcasts. And then one of the first things we seen happen was oversaturation, through all of that. Everybody and their mom now does content, and it's 99.9% of content is garbage because of it. A lot of people are out there talking that don't know their ass from a hole in the ground, and whatever. And then you have people that will come out overnight and accumulate mass followings, and it's like it's obvious that these people are being propped up. One of the people I can think of, and just my opinion, you guys ever Ian Carroll, right? Like this dude comes out and basically overnight, boom, he's on Joe Rogan and all kinds of shit. That lets you know right there, something's a little iffy about that. I'm not saying he doesn't do good work. It's interesting content, but at the same time, it's got to make you a suspect. Look at a lot of the other ones too. People consider Tucker Carlson now as like a conspiracy theorist. It's like, are you kidding me? This guy worked for like fucking CNN and fucking Fox News and all of this shit. And it's like, and people think he's one of us now. His dad was in the CIA, like all of this. It's like, this is clearly an asset, And if he's not a direct asset, he's taken millions of dollars from questionable people over his career. I'm not saying he's a bad person, or that he has bad content. It's very entertaining, has a really cool guest. But at the same time, you got to question the source, where it's coming from. I think one of the things that made podcasting and all this stuff really awesome is that it's real people. People got tired of the fabrication and, the production of it all. It's like, who the fuck wants a Hollywood television production, when you're trying to get something real, raw, and true? It's like everything is so fake in this world. It's like, I think that's what led to the rise of like that, is because it's like people finally, started realizing that there's value in a genuine, real human being. Yeah. You look at like Candace Owens, and very obviously, I think to me, very obviously, she's in bed with some powerful people as well. Her husband, he ran Parlor, and after she left the Daily Wire or whatever, she then converted to Catholicism. And anybody knows anything, it's Israel and the Pope. Those are the two pillars of power in this world. Those are the two pillars of power in this world. And then you can see too that there's a vested interest in how all of these people also hitch their wagon to the whole Trump shit as well. That lets you know too, whenever you're part of that political machine, you're part of the machine. You're doing more to enslave than you are to free. And that's just flat out. That's just how it is. And then you can see too how and if you look at what's going on in France, who is France having issues with? And I just want to kind of get your brain turned. Who is France having issues with right now? Right? Israel. It's like all about the anti-Semitic sentiment and stuff like that. Literally, Kushner's dad, I believe, is our ambassador or whatever that goes to France to speak to them. And he literally told them that it's their talk to them about their anti-Semitism. Which is crazy. I don't know if you guys seen a lot of the reels and videos that I put out recently. I've been doing a lot of my own reels now. I feel like it's just you can get a lot more out of that than you can long form podcasts anymore. Um, but it was alleged that Trump converted to Judaism during his first term. And we've seen him, touching, at the Wailing Wall. We've seen him, and that he's with Shava Lupovich. We've seen so many different things that would allude to that as well, right? And we said, and it was alleged that he converted to Judaism in a private ceremony, that they kept this private because he's Christian base, right? Like, which I have no fucking idea why Christians have hitched their wagon to him. There's nothing Christian about that dude, but whatever. And the reason being, we all know the real reason being is because all the Zionist televangelists have hitched their wagon to him, and they lead the Christians by the balls, they lead all of them around, tell them who to vote for, tell them what to believe and all of that, which is nuts that people listen to any of those people as well, which you're not even allowed to say Zionist anymore. But you see, remember he basically, gave the, said that they weren't a religion or a race, essentially giving them this divine, through executive order. He's had all these different executive orders against anti-Semitism. Everything he's done is especially, it's been like the world tour of make Israel great again, It's fucking nuts. It's crazy to watch. And honestly, I just don't see how people at this point in the game could even believe that he's on our side at all. Honestly, I don't get it. I don't see how you can. I knew back in Trump's first term that he was controlled opposition. I knew it. As soon as he started going, out connecting to Alex Jones, which is also controlled opposition, And then he gets in office, and 30 days after he gets into office, he bombs Syria because of their alleged chemical attacks, right? And it's like that is the same thing Obama did. It's like, damn, it's like we've been had. We've been had. And then they blamed it on all the people that he brought in. And it's like, just like, and isn't it weird? It's like it's like these repeating cycles. It's like when I look at Trump's first term and compare it to his second term, you guys remember General Flynn during the first term? It's like probably the only like decent dude in his entire clique. He let them roast him and sacrificed him, and then once General Flynn was gone, it was belly up, right? It was all, he did Operation Warp Speed, bringing in the vaccines. He did all that shit. People forget that, dude. 30,000 National Guard troops for the Transition Integration Project during the elections, right? Occupying the nation's capital, just all this crazy shit. He tried to, what was it? Tried to fucking habeas corpus. He tried to fucking suspend habeas corpus, which is due process. Like, do people not remember this? The reauthorization of the fucking Patriot Act in 2020. Do people not remember this? And then this time around, the great big beautiful bill where he takes the restrictions on artificial intelligence for the next 10 fucking years. And then once Elon Musk steps out of the system this time, Elon Musk is like the General Flynn, of this term, And Elon Musk comes out of there, and it's like all of a sudden, it's like the leashes are off. He's full blown Zionist, full blown Israel, which he always has been. But it's like there's no slowing down now. There's no slowing down now. It's gonna take. And then when he comes out and says, basically telling us that the Epstein stuff is a nothing burger. It's like, at what point do we say, okay, We see through the bullshit now. We've had enough. Yeah. When you look at like the book of Revelation and shit, and it talks about how in the last days, you know, that basically the world would be corrupt, would be full of pride. We would, we'd all worship this beast system. And it's like, as a child, I would picture it so differently than how it actually, which is crazy, I guess. I'm 80s and 90s was a very different time. I want to say it was more pure, it was a more pure time than what we live in now. I always pictured that in the 2000s, like cars would be flying and shit. As a kid, I can remember that too. I don't know about you guys, but that was just me. I would picture cars flying, and when I thought about the beast system, I just thought, wow, imagine a world where everybody worships the devil, and it's like I thought about just a whole different picture than what it actually means, and what it actually means as opposed to what I had in my mind is two totally different things. And instead of people outright worshiping Satan, they do it through their actions and their choices, and their moral code and what they accept and what they go along with, and it's like everybody, into the beast system. It's not, it's not like those cheesy Christian movies and shit would make it, those cheesy Christian movies and stuff would be like everybody have 666 written on their head, and just be flat out evil, and they'd be beheading Christians in the street, Like that's how those movies would go. All of a sudden there'd be a rapture, and the only ones that were left, would be all those devil worshippers and a few good people that were on the fence. Nothing like that. What we actually see is something totally different. We actually see in order to sell your soul that it happens incrementally, and it happens through our choices that we make. And I can say this firsthand, someone that has participated in cults, someone that has participated in Satanism and Luciferianism and, black magic and things of that nature, sex magic, things like that. Like I can tell you that the corruption doesn't happen overnight. It's bit by bit, piece by piece. And it's like, once you bow down to that power, and here's the crazy thing. So I heard it put this way, and it really makes a lot of sense to me, that the Satan or the beast that we deal with today is not the same Satan that they dealt with in ancient times, right? Like in the ancient world before Christ, right? Satan really did own this world, right? He was in charge, He had authority over all of us because in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, man, we gave him that authority, right? So we gave him dominion over us, in the garden. So it was a different beast back then, right? He could do whatever he wanted to do to man. He didn't need our permission because we already gave it to him, And then when you look at after Christ descended down, right? And he took the keys to death and Hades, right? So he took that dominion away from Satan. And if Satan didn't have the dominion, he wouldn't have been able to offer Jesus, during the 40 days in the desert. He wouldn't be able to offer him the world, right? If it wasn't his world, he wouldn't be able to offer it to him. Satan can lie, but he doesn't lie to God. Like that's the one person he doesn't lie to. He's not that dumb, And, he said, you bow down and worship me, I'll give you the world, He wouldn't have been able to offer that at all, if it wasn't his world to offer, if he didn't have dominion over it, And when Jesus took the keys to death and Hades, he took the dominion back for mankind, right? which is awesome. It's beautiful, actually, when you think about it. Um, it's like he paid our ransom. It's like when you think about what that actually means, and no matter what your beliefs are on it, you know, it's because we were taken hostage, you know, and I'm trying to think of what the word is in Greek. Tetsa. Hold on. Telestai. To telestai or whatever, right? Which means in Greek it means when he said, it is finished, it means to telestai. I believe is a Greek word. Somebody can correct the pronunciation, but it's literally like a threefold word, which means like in a legal sense, right? Like judgment has been passed. In a legal sense, it's finished legally. Like judgment has been passed. And then in a financial sense, all dues have been paid in full, payment paid in full. Judgment has been made, right? And it's completed, right? So it's like, multiple levels. When he said to telestai, it's like saying like multiple levels, And I feel like we've lost a lot of what, the etymology of these words mean through the English language, honestly. When we really think about it. It's like whenever, you hear like it is finished, you don't get the true depth of that, You don't understand, you can't wrap your head around what that means. And when you look at these etymologies of the words, you're like, holy shit. This is literally like this word that's saying from every, the payment has been made in full, right? Case closed, right? Like it's over, right? And it's pretty amazing. It's like the same way when it talks about Satan coming as an angel of light. It's metaschizmoia, right? Which means, we think, and whenever I would think of that, and this is how the whole reptilian shit is legit, for real. It's legit as hell. So metaschizmoia means like a shapeshifter, right? So, and people, you can't even say the word reptilian without people getting squeamish and, tuning out because it sounds so, woo-woo or whatever. But metaschizmoia, it's a shapeshifter. So it's like when it says he can appear as an angel of light, or, that basically, be careful how you're treating people because you could be, talking to an angel in disguise, right? Well, that's true of all of them. It appears that these entities are in fact shapeshifters. They can change into anything they would like to. And Satan, same thing, right? Metaschizmoia. I mean, it can appear to you however, and if you think about a lot of these deities, which I've found just from, my own stuff in the occult, a lot of times when people have spirit guides or pray to these gods and goddesses and stuff like that, a lot of the ways that they deceive people or get them locked in is by appearing to them as something that they want. Like if you want to see a beautiful woman, they appear as a beautiful woman, right? If you want to see this, think about Lucifer, right? He's the light bearer, right? He's the angel of light, right? It's like he appears as something, magnificent. That's why, and think about it, a lot of them must do this because any time that someone ever encounters one of these angelic beings, in the Bible especially, but in any ancient text or spiritual text, what happens? They always fall right on their face, They always fall right on their face and worship. So it must be quite the encounter, right? Quite the experience for you to instantly just hit your face and be like, you're afraid to even behold this being, And they're always like, get up, All the good ones are always like, get up. I'm not God. Get up. Don't be afraid, So there must be something within the way that they can appear to you. And if you ever like listen to a lot of people's different, NDEs where they have these near-death experiences and they experience heaven or hell or things like that. What I find to be incredibly interesting, and I can see this now, as something I couldn't really see when I was younger, before having some of my own experiences. It's like people, I would always imagine, like, when I would think about death, I would think like that's the end of the party. It's like, how could death or the afterlife, shall I put it, how could the afterlife even be? I felt like it would suck, I felt like it would suck. It's like the afterlife would have to suck. It's like you're not able to experience anything anymore. It's like, this is life. But when you have these people that have these NDEs and they talk about, what it's like in that realm, they talk about being more alive than when they were alive, And you can kind of see how that would be. If your consciousness is what actually animates your body, it's like you're limited in what you're able to experience now, through the five senses and, through the flesh. It's like you're getting a very, very limited perspective of things, a limited experience of things. You see 0.0001% of the electromagnetic light spectrum. You only access 10% of your brain at any given time, right? You're very, very limited, And it's like, when we take off the flesh, it's like we take off the blinders. It's like we can actually see and experience and there's probably far more senses even than we can even imagine, and a lot of people describe that, that when, they have these NDEs and they experience heaven or hell, that they're more alive than when they were alive, I just find it very strange, how we went from a world where everybody understood and knew that there was a God. Everybody understood and knew that we were spiritual beings, to a world to where it's like we have to relearn it now. It's like we're conditioned and taught, through school and all that. We're programmed. It's programmed right out of us. They take the life right out of us when we go to school and all of this. That's part of like becoming an adult, basically. It's like, oh, you're not an adult till, it's like you're made to feel silly if you believe in certain things. And still to this day, I experience it all the time. Try talking about certain things, People believe you're either crazy or you're a conspiracy theorist or, whatever, right? It's like, when there's so much that we don't see, so much that we can't be aware of. It's like, if it isn't obvious to you at this point that there is a spiritual war literally going on this earth, and it clearly is. It's for souls. It's for the soul of humanity. If you can't see that, it's because you're blind. You're blind. It's not because you don't have the ability. It's because you choose not to see. It's uncomfortable. It's an uncomfortable and inconvenient truth to most people. If we admit that there's a God and we admit that there's a good and there's an evil, in a lot of the new age, man, and I'm guilty for this. I've fallen victim and prey to a lot of these ideologies, man, that were just false. Like being that there's no good or evil, right? It's just not true. Like, oh, well, it's all in perspective. It's the people that think like that do things to children. It's the people that think like that sacrifice people, right? Because they don't see it as good nor evil. Where does good end and evil begin? Well, good ends and evil begins where you infringe on another person's free will, where you take life, where you harm something. That's where it ends and begins. And it's like we can use fancy words to convince people, like, and a lot do. They're very good with it. That there is no such thing, but there is, and we all know there is. If not, we wouldn't have that little voice inside of us that's telling us we're doing something fucked up when we're doing something fucked up. That little conscience inside of you that's like, don't do that. It wouldn't be there if there was no good or evil. And it's like society, we don't admit there's a God, and we don't admit there's a good or an evil, because that means we have to be responsible and accountable for what we do and what we say and who we are. I feel like that, at least myself, I can only speak for myself. It was really easy for me to be deceived by a lot, because it allowed me to escape me. It allowed me to escape accountability for me. If that makes sense. It's like, oh, well, that's relative, right? Like, it's no good or evil. And when you think you're your own God, then you can basically justify anything. I have seen many people justify a lot of terrible, terrible things, right? And say, well, like, God doesn't lead you to adultery or to affairs and shit like that, which people think, I would have people email me and shit, married women and stuff like that. I mean, like, God said you're my soulmate, but you're married. No, your husband's your soulmate. But when we believe that we are our own God, when we believe good and evil and all of that is relative, when we live under this delusion, that everything can be justified through, and that's what turns a lot of people away from spirituality, because you always have people do that. They pervert it. They pervert it, and they use it to justify their own desires. And it's like, I think that's why we have the Bible. Truly, the Bible seems really harsh in a lot of its rules. Seems very restrictive in its rules, but if you really think about it, it's a code of morality, the basic instructions before leaving Earth, right? Like, it's a code of morality. God is giving you an outline. It's like, hey, these rules, some of those rules do suck. I'll just be honest. I think some of them suck. I'm not a fan of all of them. But it's like we're given an outline of what keeps us away from God. It's like, well, if you do these things, like, this creates distance between, me and you. And when I say God, I don't mean like a man up in the sky. I mean like that burning fire of that divine spark that's within each and every single one of us. But we can't tap into that power, when we're doing certain things, right? It's like we're out of a state of grace. And I've said this before, like, whenever, and just, I know, and I've spoken about this, if I wanted to hex you, if I wanted to curse you, if I wanted to send something your way, right? Like, doing some type, regular witchcraft, right? If I want to send something negative to you, I I'll call upon a demon to do my work for me. And I'll send that demon. I'll do my ritual. I'll make my offerings or whatever according to, what the spirit is. I'll do it at a particular time and day and, phase of the moon and all of that, right? Once I've got all that worked out, the demon's going to come to you, usually, 3 times or, whatever. And those times that it comes, it's going to come at, let's just hypothetically say it comes at 1 o'clock on Tuesday, 3 o'clock on Friday, 4 o'clock on Saturday, right? It's going to come those particular times to you, and then it returns, right? Well, if it comes those 3 times and all 3 times you're in a state of grace, then my spell won't work, right? I'll have low accuracy, on whatever I'm trying to do to you. Because each time it came to you, because when you're in a state of grace, you're protected from all of that, right? That's like people don't understand, like that's why there's power, in Christ. That's why there's power in that, because when you're in that, it's literally this spiritual anointing. It's like you stepping in, it's like you being royalty, right? But choosing to be bastardized instead of like accepting your crown. That's what like living out of a state of grace actually is, truly. It's like us being kings and queens and deciding to be a peasant, because that's how much power you have when you're out of grace. You're a peasant, you're allowing, and here's the thing, when I said this earlier, how, we don't deal with the same Satan that we dealt with before Christ. See, Satan before Christ had dominion over all of us because we gave it to him in the Garden of Eden, right? With Adam, right? But this Satan doesn't have dominion because Christ took dominion back, right? They took the keys to death and Hades, right? Death and hell, right? So now in Christ we have dominion over all things, right? So Satan doesn't have dominion. So in order for demons and all of that to work on you, you have to allow them. They can't do nothing to you, right? They can't do anything to you unless it's like basically like they can't shoot you, but they can get you to shoot yourself is essentially how it works, right? And one of the greatest, tricks that the enemy actually does is to deceive us into believing that it has more power than what it actually does. Because if we believe that it has power, it's like we're giving it power. And it's like it can't do anything without our permission, right? Because of Jesus, right? So it can't do anything without our permission. So when we're out of that state of grace, that's us essentially giving permission, right? We're giving permission. So if that demon returns to you 2, 3, 4 times, right? And it returns to you 1 time and you're out of that state of grace, right? Then you're giving it place, right? Something to attach to. See, hexes and curses and magic and all that, they only work if they have to have negativity. They have to have sin to attach to in order to take root, to take hold. A lot of people don't know that. A lot of people don't know that. They think when, magic or curses, and it's like nobody that's doing that to you is going to tell you that. If I'm trying to hex you or curse you, I'm not going to tell you the truth about it. I'm not going to say, hey, this is only going to work if you have something for it to attach to. This is only going to work, if you believe it has power. This is only going to work if you're out of a state of grace when the demon comes, So a lot of those truths don't get told, That's why in society, we wonder, like, why would they want to corrupt, our minds so much? Why would they want to debase all of society so much? It's like, well, you got to understand, who the powers of this world and who they're ran by, And one thing I find to be incredibly crazy is like when they talk about Eisenhower and how he made this pact with, extraterrestrials and all of this for technology. Where my mind goes when I hear stuff like that? I don't think of like physical aliens coming down to the earth and talking to the President Eisenhower and them shaking hands and saying, yes, now we're on the side of the Zeta Reticuli and da-da-da-da. And that's not what my mind goes to. my mind goes to, that was probably the regime of the government where it became total Satanist or something, and they started using occult and satanic methods in order to get their technology. If you think about it, a lot of these elites and powers that be, they use DMT, right, in order to converse with the clockwork elves, machine elves, altered states of consciousness. And that's why we had a lot of these different studies through the CIA and shit, studying different forms of consciousness, remote viewing and all of this. These are all occultist things, right? And when you're in the occult, like, astral projection, remote viewing, I mean, think about all of it, it's like, and I can channel a demon. I can converse with a demon and specific demons. And I did an episode on a book called The Grand Clavicle of Solomon, right? It's the Grand Grimoire, right? And it's a nasty grimoire, by the way. I do not recommend you reading it, looking at it. Like I said, I used to be a believer that you can read any book and it's okay. I no longer believe that anymore. I've learned my lesson the hard way on that one. I've read a lot of fucking crazy stuff, and some of it's had really profound effects on me. Really profound effects on me just from reading it. And then, let alone because I read a lot of it out loud to a lot of people. It amplified it a whole lot, and I experienced a whole lot of paranormal activity as a result of those things. And I do not recommend people doing that. I don't. Because, even as you're looking at the images of the sigils and all of that, like I said, the eyes are the windows to the soul. So you are making an energetic connection with those things, and when you're reciting those incantations and all of that, you're speaking them out into the ether. It's word magic. Whether you think you're doing it or not, you are. So be careful what you read. Be careful what you ingest. Be careful what you look at. You got to remember, like, you are, it's like you eat a bunch of fucking McDonald's, you're going to get fat, right? So you're looking at a bunch of dark stuff. You're reading a bunch of dark stuff. It's, it's got to come out at one side. E equals MC squared, buddy. Right? Energy it's got to go somewhere, and it's got to come out somewhere, So whatever you're taking in is what you're going to put back out. I had to learn that the hard way, the extreme hard way. So, but I feel like a lot of these pacts, that we've heard of and stuff like that with our government, it's just our government. You can go through, like I said, with the Le Grand Grimoire, right? The Grand Clavicle of Solomon, right? In that particular book, it goes through the rank and file of all demons, right? And shows you their rank and which demon, to contact for what thing you want. It also has pacts as well, right? How to sell your soul. How to make pacts. Demons can go do things like they can find stuff, right? So you wonder, like, how these people come up with great ideas to make money and shit like that. That demon can find that for you. The demon, when a demon finds treasure, and this is what people think, like when they think of like a spell to have a demon go find treasure, and watch, I say that, and like somebody's gonna go get that book now and go do some shit. But it's a foul book, just saying. But when you have like a demon go find treasure, it doesn't necessarily go find treasure like, in the 1600s, like a fucking chest full of gold, right? The treasure can come, and it usually comes in a multitude of ways. It might bring you, just hypothetically speaking, the demon brings you back, a blank book. per se, right? You're like, what the fuck, bro? I did this spell and I keep getting a blank book, right? And it's telling you to write a book, right? That's the treasure. It's saying if you write this book, you're going to get a huge amount of money type thing, right? So that's how that works, or different ideas, stuff like that. That's usually the type of ways you get treasure. In that particular text as well, you wonder why they have like the 27 club and shit like that. Like, why at these particular ages people are sacrificed and shit like that? It's because, there are 15-year and 30-year contracts as well, right? When you sell your soul, there are contracts for 15 years, right? Where that's all you get, you made the pact and in 15 years you die, that's the end of the contract, and and then there's some 30-year ones, but the more time you're asking for, the more you got to pay. Like I said, when it comes to energy, there's nothing is for free, right? And that's why abortion is so huge, because that's the biggest payments you can give, right? So that's why that's so huge, like, because you're giving an entire life. And I said this before, like, whenever you're asking for something that's outside of your destiny, it's basically you're asking for a new life. So it's going to take the equivalent and sacrifice. It's going to take a life, to change your life, right? So one contract is to lose the person you love the most, right? Like, so a lot of people are willing to do that. And this is crazy. You even heard Kanye West say this, like, that his mother was taken first, and then you'll see a lot of rappers, like, every time they release a new album, someone around them dies. That's because that's what they're doing. They're giving up someone they love, right, within that contract each time, and you say, well, how could they give up someone that, that they don't own, that they're not a part of, or, whatever. Like, well, just like I said, the demon comes and that person's not in a state of grace, which allows an entrance. It's like it's knocking on the door, and it's sent to knock on the door so many times. But when it knocks on the door once, and you've got the door unlocked, it's coming in, And when you do a hex, hexes are different because hexes aren't just sending the demon to knock on the door. He stands at the door and waits, and, through like abortion and stuff like that, those are some of if you wonder why that's such a big thing, with the elites, the whole, offing of the little ones and stuff like that. That's why that's so huge, because that's like the biggest form of payment, right? Trading someone you love or that, sacrifice. Your soul only gets you in the door, that's the price of admission, but if you want to add to that, which you got to think, it's never enough. It's never enough. Once you have a taste of like fame and fortune and stuff like that, especially if you're someone that comes from poverty, like the only thing you think of is losing it. That becomes your fear. It becomes so important to people. And just think about people in normal ass society. And somebody like this. Some of you people might be like this. Right? People that are so afraid to have their stability shaken. Right? so afraid to have their stability shaken. They're so afraid that if they'll lose their job, they're so afraid that if they, they don't have this amount of money in the bank. It's like, I'm sorry, man, but you're about an inch deep spiritually. You're in deep shit. You're one of the easiest people in the world to compromise. Because that's all it's going to take is someone to kick the legs out from underneath you financially. And that's usually that's the first form of attack. Whenever they go to attack a person, the first thing they hit is finances, because that's usually the most effective. Most people are just corrupt for money, flat out. Money gets you. It's like, just like I just said, so many people are afraid of losing their stability. It's like once you threaten stability, that's all it takes, right? And you've got those people. They'll sell their bodies. That's where, it's like, you ever see people that marry, for stability? That's what they're doing, They're essentially prostituting, If they're not marrying for love, then you shouldn't be marrying, in my opinion. Like I don't understand. I don't understand how people look at themselves in the mirror. Like, don't think that about themselves, right? If you'll marry for stability, which means you'll marry for money, right? Then you'll do anything for money. You will. Money rules you. It's your God. And most people's God is money. That's where it's like a lot of good Christians and religious people draw the line, like when it costs money, that's where it ends for people. That's where it ends for people. People get offended in their pocketbook. They get offended in their religion and in their politics. Those are the things where you can hit people the hardest. Hit people the hardest. I mean, it's crazy, but that's our society now. That's our world now. It really is. That's the world that we have created. That's the type of people we created. And we've done it. I think it's happened slowly. You think about people in like the Depression and stuff like that. Imagine how different those kind of people were. Those were like really hard ass people. If they got married, they never divorced. They worked through their problems. You look at society now, and for one, we have all of these like hot takes on the internet and, popular phrases like, narcissists and stuff like that. So everybody claims that the person that they were with, or broke up with or divorced was a narcissist because it's something pushed on, all the little relationship reels and memes and all of that, right? Anybody that disagrees with you or doesn't put up with your shit is a narcissist now. Even if you were the one who cheated or whatever, right? They were the narcissist, not you. And we have it's so accessible. We have so many people in our DMs. There are a million dating sites and dating apps and, all of this. Like, it's so easy for us to replace somebody. It's just like that, right? Like you could break up today with someone and have someone new tonight, especially if you're a female, right? It becomes even easier. But I mean, even for males, it's easy for us like that too now, But it's like you can have somebody new instantly. It's like girls post pictures of themselves online. And what do you see? You see 1,000 men liking their pictures and in the comment section saying, "Oh, you're so beautiful." Da, da, da. It's like that shit goes to people's heads, man. It goes to people's heads. It makes them believe something about themselves that's not true. It's like it creates this sense of it. And pride goeth before destruction, right? So they'll have a good person in their life, You know, and they say like cheating and stuff like that is like it's it's throwing down a diamond and picking up a rock. You know what I mean? It's like throwing a diamond away, you know, and picking up a rock or a piece of dirt instead. You know, because anyone that's willing to cheat with somebody is a dirtbag. You know, not just the person cheating, but the person who's willing to do it with them is a dirtbag also. No respectable, decent person would be willing to do that. You know, but it's like we have it all so acceptable now that, you know, back in the day, and for whatever it's worth, you know, um, people worked through their shit, you know, divorce and stuff like that because, you know, they were, you know, their religions and stuff like that didn't permit it. You know, they didn't believe in divorce. So, like, it meant something to them when they made a vow. You know, that vow was, you know, before God, it was before their community, their family, their friends, all of it. Like, that was something real. They weren't married 3 fucking times, you know? They were married once, maybe twice if the person died or something, you know? Or there was, you know, the only time divorce was okay was, you know, if somebody had an affair or something like that, or beat the shit out of them. And even then, a lot of people still dealt with that stuff, you know? But nowadays, it's so accessible and so easy for us, you know, to have somebody new to sleep with that same day, you know, or a billion people in our comments telling us how handsome or sexy we are and da 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 da, you know, that instead of facing our problems, you know, and a lot of us, you know, it's like how many people say, and this is, and it's like, and you really like think about the psychology of this too, like think about the thought process of this and like the morality of this, like people who believe like, well, they should accept me as is. What are you talking about, motherfucker? Like, no, they shouldn't. Like, if you're out running the bars and, you know, like, you know, you're dealing with the opposite sex in inappropriate ways and all this, like, they should not accept that, right? Like, you should be respecting the person you're with. You know, you should be treating them with respect, and out of that respect and adoration, certain behaviors end when you are in a relationship, you know? Like when I'm in a relationship, I just don't deal with females in an inappropriate way at all. You know, at all. I just don't do it. You don't go into the barber shop, you don't get your hair cut. You know what I mean? So I don't do it. It's disrespectful to the person I'm with. You know? I don't even want it to look like there could be a possibility. I don't want to, you know, we are naturally, you know, male and female, we naturally mate. You know, so it's like if you develop relationships with people, I don't feel like we can be friends, just to be honest. You know, when people say, oh, we're just friends, you know, well, I hate to tell you, if a guy is your friend, he's just waiting on you to let him sleep with you. You know, as a guy, I'm telling you, that is just the truth. You know, the only reason guys are ever friends with women is because the woman has friend zoned them and they won't sleep with them. Pretty much, you know. People can disagree. I don't really care. Well, but that's just how it is. You know, so we've got this bullshit idea of like people should accept us as is, meaning all our bullshit, disrespectful, atrocious, immoral behavior, right? Inappropriate behavior for a relationship. And it's like, if we're behaving these ways and we're putting ourselves out there and we're acting like this, thinking like we can be inappropriately hanging out with the opposite sex, we can be showing our bodies all online, having inappropriate private conversations and all this shit, you know, which is just bullshit, you know, and it's like you being a shit person is what it is. And then you think somebody has to accept that if they really love you. No, if you really love them, you cut that shit out, is what you do, you know? And then when someone doesn't accept that, then they take that, instead of them changing, right, and working through the relationship and maturing as a person, you know, and evolving as a person, you know, instead of them maturing, evolving, changing, and then the two of them maturing together, growing together, right? They blame the other person, right? They're controlling. or they're a narcissist, or they're this, whatever, they heard off of the internet, whatever psychiatric diagnosis they got off the web, right? Whatever Facebook reel they got, and so they think the relationship's broken. This isn't going to work anymore. They break up with the person and they instantly have, and instead of, grieving the relationship, they're right back out there before they're even healed, usually. Some people are the type of people who will get someone before they're even done with the last person. I know a lot of people like that will, they will string the person that they're getting ready to break up with along until they find somebody new, and then they probably won't even tell them that they're sleeping with somebody new until they know it's going to work for a fact. There are just shitty people on the earth, But anyways, and then they take that same bullshit into the next relationship, and then what happens, dude? Like the same problems eventually arise because you ain't changed nothing about yourself. You're going to, and then instead of you working through it, changing, or working through your problems or your issues, you start all over. It's easier to just sleep with somebody new than it is to like figure out what the issue is and like actually work through that issue and work through that problem, Like so many people have their own ideas, about what is right. It's like, and I hate to say it, that's what, and that's kind of like what makes, religion really, really a beneficial thing to people's life. Because if you have, religion or something like that, at least you've got an agreed upon set of rules of what's okay. At least two people are in the same place. It's like, okay, well, you don't have one person with one idea and one person with a total fucking different idea. You ever been in a relationship like that where it's like, one person is like a free bird, free spirit, and they believe like totally different than the other person? That never works, because you guys have two different ideas of what's appropriate and, what's okay and what's respectful and not, So somebody's going to end up with hurt feelings that way. And this is our entire society. Our entire society is built like this, where we're constantly catering to the fucked up parts of ourselves, and finding ways not to change, not to improve, not to grow, finding ways to make our immorality okay. Always. I don't care what it is, dude. If you believe in a certain something, you will go to the political party that believes that. And there'll always be a party that accepts something, right? Whether it's, abortion or it's racism or it's something. Like there's always someone somewhere that accepts that. And it's like you will justify it by any means. I see the people use the Bible to justify, terrible and fucked up stuff, They will twist the Bible, and people can basically take Bible verses and spin it in any direction they want to make it sound like whatever they need to support their ideology. You see people do this with race and all kinds of stuff. It's like when you really truly think about it, I think Jesus said it best, when he said like, it's like trying to live under the law, the curse of the law. We can't do it, dude. It's just too hard. There's too many restrictions. We're too fucking wild, People are. I am, for sure. I'm wild as shit. But, Jesus saying that, the two commandments, love the Lord thy God with all your heart and soul, and then love one another as I have loved you. Right? Like, and that those two commandments fill the entirety of the law. And it's like, if we're living by those two rules, like, then we really can't go wrong in life. If that's like the agreed upon rule, right? Or the agreed upon standard. Like, asking ourselves in life, like, okay, well, if it's, okay, hold on, just see what, like, if this doesn't, if this doesn't go according to love, then it's wrong, basically. Now imagine if the world, if that was a requirement, imagine how different our world would be. There would never be crime, there would never be hunger, there would never be theft. I live in the city, so there's a lot of homeless people here. A lot of homeless people here. And I see the most disgusting attitudes towards homeless people, which I feel bad as I say that. Dude's walking, pushing a fucking shopping cart. But, I see the most disgusting attitudes, towards, homeless people, drug addicts, so on and so forth. People, they'll say things like, and it makes me want to slap the people right in their mouth is what it makes me want to do, and they say, why would I give that person $1? They're just going to buy drugs or buy a beer with it. It's like, you bitch ass motherfucker. It's like, that's why the Bible says, like, never let your left hand know what the right hand is doing. Like, judge not lest ye be judged. From the mouth, the heart speaks. I could come up with a million more on that. You're just showing what a rotten piece of shit person you are when you say things like that. You're not supposed to give or to do whatever, for people based on what you think they're going to do with it. Because then you're playing God that way. It's like you saying, oh, well, yes, this person's homeless. Yes, $1 really means nothing to me. It's $1, but to them it means it's a big fucking deal, To them, $5, $10, $20, $50, it's a big fucking deal, to somebody that's broke or to somebody that's homeless. It's a huge deal. Trust me, when you're broke, it's a huge deal, And it's like, but then we have this, this arrogance about us where we're like, oh, well, we won't give to the homeless person because we're afraid they'll buy a 40 ounce of fucking beer with it. It's like, that's not for us to decide, You give because you're giving, not because you want to try to judge, what you think the person's going to do. It doesn't matter what they do. It's only tasked to you, like that, it's from your heart, It's like saying, oh, well, I'm not going to help this old lady clean her gutters because I think she might sell this house next year. What? I'm not going to cut her grass because she might sell the house next week. Huh? It fucking sounds retarded. But this is how we think. This is how we treat each other. It's sad, dude. It's sad. It's like sometimes I'm almost ashamed to be a human being. Like, I mean that. Like, I'm ashamed to be part of, like, Jesus. People are so stupid. I'm ashamed to be part of, like, the human race sometimes. I really am. The shit I see people say and do and just, it's like you just, you can tell, like, people, you can tell a person that's lived a life where they've never truly been challenged or where they've never truly suffered or they've never truly been afraid or they've never truly hurt. You can see those kind of people. And like I said, and I've said this in the past, like most people do not care about a lot of things, right? And like that's why COVID was so huge. It awakened a lot of people because people don't give a fuck until it affects them personally. And that's just the sad truth about it. You know, like I can tell you all day about demonic attacks and witchcraft and all of that, but you're not going to have a real interest in it until it happens to you. You know, I can tell you how prominent, Satanism and cults are probably in your hometown. But until they've got you taped up in the back of a trunk or something like that, you know, or people you love come up missing, you're not gonna give a shit, or they start changing the laws where you live really crazy and screwed up, like you're not gonna care, and you talk about poverty or giving or things like that. It's like a lot of people don't care until they're poor, until they're homeless, or until they need something. Like, and that's the type of society we have. That's where everybody seems to be these days. In society, and it's really crazy. It's disturbing. It's really disturbing. Like, since when, was it cool or okay to like just be these, to have no compassion for other human beings whatsoever? To be, most people's universe, most people's world is no bigger than themselves. Truthfully. Like, it's no bigger. Some people's extends a little farther. Their orbit goes out a little further to like their family, maybe their friends. That, like, and that's asking a lot from most humans, just to keep it real. Family and friends. There are some people that don't even care about the person they're married to. Everything in their existence is about me. Me. How can I feed me? How can I feed my urges, my desires? And they can basically justify doing any fucking thing. As long as it's like satiating, what they want. We've fallen into a deep, dark hole as a species. And it says, like, as in the days of Noah, so it will be in the end. I want to ask you, like, and this is a real, genuine question. Do you believe that we are there? Are we at something similar to the days of Noah? Just according to you personally, think about that. Like, do you feel like that's where we are? Because I feel like we're getting really close. I know there's like this illusion. It's like, see, this is, there's this real disillusionment with the internet. So most people think, because you got to understand that your algorithm is programmed to push back at you what you look at, what you search, what you like, right? So we have this echo chamber of our own ideas constantly being fed to us, which gives us the illusion that everybody thinks that way too, that everything, you know what I mean? Like, I hope that makes sense to some of you. It's like, so it's like if you're constantly being fed videos about, the stuff you're into, it seems like more people are into that than what they are. It seems like more like a person like myself, like it would appear as if everybody's waking up now, right? Because I'm being constantly fed those videos. That's what my algorithm is full of, right? So many people are coming to the truth. So many people are coming to God, when the reality is, it's like, no. That's like a very, very small percentage of people, but I'm just getting that fed to me constantly. I'm getting my own ideas and shit reinforced. That's where people get in these, that's why we have these echo chambers the way we do, in these fucking internet ghettos. Like, that's where that shit comes from. Like, and people become extreme with their ideologies, whether it's like, these conservative, liberal ideologies, whether it's, religious ideologies. It doesn't matter. You know, they become extreme with it because they're fed that constantly, right? It's like when you're having that pumped into you all day, and you think that that's what everybody else is believing as well, right? And you're having nothing. So and how I said earlier, how everything is anti and pro. Now that's what we've been relegated to as a species, anti and pro, which is crazy, right? Like everything that we see online is you're either anti-abortion, pro-abortion, right, or pro-life, right? Anti-LGBTQ, pro-LGBTQ, right? Like there's no middle ground. No moderation, no middle ground. You know, we're being constantly convinced that thing it's black and white. It's one way or the other. You know, so you're always going to be in this camp of one thing or the other. You know. So the only thing you'll be fed in your algorithms and shit like that is your idea, and then the people who oppose your idea. So, and what that does is it polarizes people. We're polarized based on that because we think like, we get polarized into one, and it's a dualistic way of looking at things. Truly, dualistic. And pushes incredible black and white thinking. But what else? What else are we gonna do? It's like it's only up to us to understand these things. Once you begin to understand it, then it starts to shape your mind in a different way. It's like I don't want to allow my mind to be shaped, to be something so simple, to have my worldview be so simple, like in no nuance to anything. It's like human beings are full of like contradictions, like I am. I'm not just a conservative or a liberal or, like I have beliefs in all of the different things on different sides, different opinions and views. And I can't be put into a box. I can't be labeled. It's like, and when we like allow ourselves to accept that label, it's like we accept that as our identity, And when we accept that label, it's like you'll notice you start, it's like, if you put yourself in the camp of being just hypothetically, right, conservative, you're not allowed to be be in that camp unless unless you totally subscribe to every one of their ideas, right? It's like, no, conservatives are pro this and anti that. So in order to be conservative, you better be pro this and anti that. You can't switch it up, or you'll be called a liberal and whatnot, right? I just think at the end of the day, it's like, when are we gonna wake up and see, like, they're programming us to be these, to be so robotic. It's like you ain't got to worry about AI taking over. They're making you the robot, now. Truly. And it's like you would think, like, with the internet, we would be so much more connected, like as a whole, as a species. Like you really would. You would think we'd be so much more connected because I can talk to somebody in Japan. I can talk to somebody in Italy, anywhere in the world now. But it's taken away the human connection. We're disconnected on the human level. And that's what allows us to, to do like I was even saying, that's what allows us to be so judgmental and dark and evil and just disconnected from one another. It's like, you don't care if the homeless guy's starving because you don't have empathy. You're incapable of it. You're unplugged. That's why it's easy for you to watch other people suffer. That's why it's easy for you to be selfish. That's why it's easy for you to be all these things, because you're just totally unplugged from the human condition, from other people. The only thing people have today is they have Amazon, at the tip of their fingers, so everything they want is instantly brought to them. Same thing, like I said, with the relationships. Like, as soon as someone doesn't tolerate their shit, they're a narcissist, and they have 100 people in the comments telling them how sexy they are, and in their DMs trying to fuck them, and then they can have somebody that same night to replace the person they were with. And it's like honeymoon phase after honeymoon phase. On demand everything, fast food everything. What do you think we're doing? We're creating this. We're destroying our fucking selves. But, I digress. I digress. But at least with, religion, the Bible, things like that, we have parameters. We have something that lays down guidelines. Like, hey, this is going to separate you, from the spirit. This is going to keep you further away from yourself, is what it is ultimately. The farther away from God we are, the farther away from ourselves we are. Because we are that. We think of it as like this external dude in the sky and like this foreign thing. And it's like, no, there's nothing more natural to you than God. That is you. You are that. We are that. We are God experiencing itself right now. And God is in all of us. It's like we see it as, letting it in and all this. You don't have to let it in or invite it in. You are it. You are it. You just gotta fucking realize it. Activate it. Don't do things in your life to prevent it, Don't do things that's gonna block it or hinder it or keep it from, being a part of your reality. But, it's hard to talk about religion and spiritual things because it's like so many people disqualify, unless you're like a pastor or whatever, so many people, disqualify you from speaking about those things. They think if you sin or you're imperfect or you have problems or something like that, you can't talk about those things. And it can't be further from the truth because you know what? If God corrects the ones he loves, that means a lot of people that have issues, it's the fact that all of us have issues and we can recognize that, I think says a lot more, than about us than most. Because most people don't even recognize that. They don't even see that in themselves at all. So it's a good thing. We're all growing, we're all learning, we're all evolving. We're all becoming more each day. So I don't know. I guess I'm just rambling. So I'm gonna wrap it up. I do thank you guys for joining me for tonight's little chat. Um, and I want to ask all of you guys, please make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Follow me on Facebook, Instagram, X. I'm on BitChute and Rumble and all that good stuff as well. If you would like to donate and support, I'm completely viewer powered because I'm demonetized everywhere. It's paypal.me/thebestdampodcast, Cash App, Best Damn Podcast, Patreon.com, Best Damn Podcast Official, or Facebook Messenger Pay, John Keane, Best Damn Podcast. Make sure to share this link. It helps me to get it out there. That way new people can find me. And please comment too. The comments help with the algorithms and all that good stuff. So, and to all of you guys that do, like, the few that do support me and share my stuff and all that, like, thank you for that. You have no idea, like, just how much it means to me. I do appreciate it. Like I said, like, we live in a really, really shitty world with shitty people. So it's really nice to see good people, generous people, loving people, kind people. It's just, it's a rarity now, And it's like, and if you are one of those people, like, make sure that you're showing yourself, kindness and love. Because I think that's one of the hardest things for me, at least. I can be far more giving and forgiving and understanding to someone else than I can even my own self. Sometimes I think it's easy for us to forget, like, there's a lot of people that probably need us and need our love and need our generosity and our kindness and our help, and we have a multitude of ways to do that, through our wisdom, through our finances, through our empathy, like, we can be like, don't forget, that there is a person in you too that needs that also, that's just as deserving, of forgiveness, that's just as deserving of love, that's just as deserving as kindness, like, because in a world of, like, total extremes, like, where we have everybody that's extremely selfish, extremely self-centered, extremely self-serving, cold and callous, and without empathy to others. Well, then you have the other version of that, where, it's like a lot of those, the people that are extremely that way, then you have, a lot of people that, it's like they're really hard on themselves. Like, they're forgiving to others, they're kind to others, they're generous to others, but they're not to themselves. Take yourself out on a date, take yourself out to dinner, take yourself to the movie, do nice stuff for yourself too, because you're deserving of it also. And make sure that we all make mistakes. We all fuck up. We all have our vices. We all have our shortcomings. We're all learning, growing, evolving. So it's like, be understanding and compassionate to you. Because if you won't, dude, you're like your biggest advocate, is what I'm saying. And it's like, there's a fine line between being selfish, self-absorbed, self-centered piece of shit and just, in being like a good advocate for yourself, you gotta walk that line, it's like, but I feel like a lot of people that can't do it for others probably can't do it for themselves either, sadly. And then some people that do everything for others, don't feel themselves deserving or worthy of it. So it's like, we got to find that balance. So, like I said, thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe, share, like, and please donate if you can. I love you guys, and I'll see you next time. Check out my other videos and all the reels and good stuff on the other channels. Peace. Love you guys. Bye. Oh, remember, Jesus is the truth, the way, and life.